The microphone sat on the studio console like a relic from another era, scratched, dented, wrapped in electrical tape that had yellowed with age. The foam windscreen was compressed and torn in places. The cable had been replaced 3 times, but the body of the microphone itself remained untouched, unchanged, exactly as it had been for 23 years. Michael Bublé stared at it through the control room glass. The sound engineer, David Chen, had worked with everyone: Adele, Bruno Mars, Taylor Swift. He'd recorded in Abbey Road, Electric Lady, Capitol Studios. He'd used microphones worth more than most people's cars, but he'd never, in 15 years of professional recording, seen a Grammy-winning artist insist on using equipment that looked like it had been pulled from a pawn shop dumpster. "Michael," David said carefully, adjusting his glasses, "I have a Newman U87 set up in booth A, pristine condition. Or if you want warmth, there's a vintage AKG C12 that—" "I'll use that one," Michael said, pointing to the battered Shure SM58 on the console. David looked at his assistant engineer, Marcus, who raised his eyebrows but said nothing. This was the third session this week. Every time the same request. Every time David had suggested alternatives. Every time Michael had refused. The microphone had a story. David could sense it, but the story had not yet been told. This was 2015. Michael Bublé had already sold over 60 million albums worldwide. He'd won multiple Grammys. He'd performed for presidents and royalty. His voice had defined modern crooner revival, bringing classic standards to a generation that had never heard them delivered with such smoothness, such contemporary elegance. But the voice the world had fallen in love with had been shaped by a tool no one in the industry thought was good enough anymore. Michael walked into the vocal booth and carefully lifted the SM58 from its stand. He held it for a moment, running his thumb over a particularly deep scratch near the grill. The metal was cold against his palm. He closed his eyes, and suddenly he wasn't in a state-of-the-art Los Angeles recording studio anymore. He was 17 years old, standing in his grandfather Demetrio's basement in Burnaby, British Columbia. The basement smelled like old wood and motor oil. Demetrio Santaga had been a plumber for 40 years, and the space reflected a working man's life. Tools hung on pegboard walls. A workbench occupied one corner, but in the other corner, Demetrio had built something else. A small stage, nothing fancy, just a raised platform made of plywood, a single spotlight rigged from the ceiling joists, and a PA system he'd assembled from second-hand components. The microphone had come from a liquidation sale when a local community theater closed down. Demetrio had paid $12 for it. He'd brought it home, tested it, and placed it on a stand in the middle of that basement stage. "This is where you practice," Demetrio had told Michael. "Not in your bedroom, not in the shower. Here, where you can hear yourself the way an audience will hear you." Michael had been skeptical. He was 17, cocky, convinced he already knew how to sing. He'd been performing at family gatherings since he was a child. Everyone told him he had talent. Everyone said he sounded just like the old crooners on the records Demetrio played. Constantly, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Tony Bennett. But Demetrio knew something Michael didn't understand yet. Talent without discipline was just noise. "Sing Mac the Knife," Demetrio had said, settling into a folding chair at the back of the basement. "The Bobby Darin version, Show Me What You've Got." Michael had grabbed the microphone, feeling its weight, and started singing. He made it through the first verse before Demetrio held up his hand. "Stop." "What?" "I was just getting into it. You're singing like you're trying to impress someone at a wedding," Demetrio said. "You're showing off. That's not the same as connecting." Michael had been frustrated. "I'm hitting all the notes. What else do you want?" "I want you to mean it," Demetrio said simply. "Every word, every phrase. I want to believe you. When you sing, right now I don't." That had stung, but it had also been the beginning of everything that mattered. For the next 2 years, Michael spent almost every evening in that basement. After school, after weekend shifts at his part-time job stocking shelves at a grocery store. He'd come home, eat dinner quickly, and disappear downstairs. Demetrio would be waiting, sometimes with notes, sometimes just listening, always honest. The microphone became an extension of Michael's voice. He learned how to work it, how close to stand for intimacy, how to pull back for power, how to angle it for the clearest tone. He learned that the SM58 was unforgiving. It captured everything, every breath, every hesitation, every moment when he wasn't fully committed to the emotion of a lyric. "That microphone will tell you the truth," Demetrio said one night. "It won't lie to make you feel better. If you're phoning it in, it'll sound like you're phoning it in. If you mean it, people will feel it." Michael learned to mean it. He sang standards, Fly Me to the Moon, The Way You Look Tonight, Feeling Good. He sang them hundreds of times until the songs were no longer performances but conversations. Until he could deliver each phrase with the kind of lived-in understanding that made young audiences forget he was only 19 years old. The basement sessions weren't glamorous. There was no audience, no applause, just Michael, the microphone, and Demetrio's unfiltered feedback. But those sessions built the foundation for everything that came later. When Michael started getting small gigs around Vancouver, weddings, corporate events, clubs that smelled like stale beer and cleaning solution, he wanted to bring the SM-58 with him. Demetrio had refused. That microphone stays here, he'd said. When you're good enough to deserve it, you'll know. Michael hadn't understood that at the time. He'd been annoyed. It was just a microphone, a cheap one at that, but Demetrio had understood something deeper. The microphone represented the work, the discipline. The thousands of hours spent in that basement, learning not just how to sing, but why to sing. It wasn't about the equipment. It was about what the equipment symbolized. Michael's career began slowly, then accelerated suddenly. A talent competition here, a showcase there, a chance meeting with a producer who heard something special in his voice, an independent album that caught the attention of a major label executive. By the time he was 25, Michael had signed a major record deal. By 27, his self-titled debut album had gone multi-platinum. The kid from Burnaby who used to sing in his grandfather's basement was suddenly performing on international stages. But something had shifted. The bigger the venues got, the more distant the connection felt. The audiences were there, the applause was real. But Michael sometimes felt like he was performing at people instead of for them. He thought about those basement sessions, about Demetrio sitting in that folding chair, listening with complete attention, about the way every word had mattered in that small space. One afternoon in 2003, Michael was back in Vancouver between tour legs. He stopped by Demetrio's house. His grandfather was older now, moving slower but still sharp. "Come downstairs," Demetrio said. "I want to hear how you sound now." The basement looked exactly the same. The stage, the spotlight, the workbench, and on the microphone stand still in its place the SM-58. Michael picked it up. The weight was familiar. The scratches were deeper now. The foam was more compressed, but it was the same instrument. He sang Home, a song he'd written about longing and belonging. When he finished, Demetrio was quiet for a long moment. "That's the first time I've heard you sound like yourself in years," he finally said. "What do you mean? On your albums, you sound like you're trying to be someone. Here, you sound like you're trying to say something. There's a difference." Michael had felt that truth land in his chest like a weight. He'd been so focused on success, on building a career, on proving himself in an industry that didn't take crooners seriously anymore, that he'd lost touch with the reason he'd started singing in the first place. "Can I take the microphone?" Michael asked. "I want to bring it into the studio. I want to remember what this feels like." Demetrio had smiled. "Now you're ready for it." From that moment on, the SM-58 traveled with Michael. Not to live performances, venue sound systems required different equipment, but to every recording session. Every vocal tracking date, every moment when his voice needed to be captured for posterity. Engineers were always confused, then skeptical, then resistant. "This is a stage microphone," they'd say. "It's not designed for studio recording. You'll lose clarity. You'll lose the high-end sparkle. We have better options." Michael would smile politely and use the SM-58 anyway, because they didn't understand what he was recording. He wasn't just capturing notes and phrases. He was capturing intention, connection, the thing Demetrio had taught him in that basement. The microphone had a sound, but more than that, it had a feeling. When Michael held it, he remembered why he was singing, not to impress, not to prove anything, but to connect, to mean every word. David Chen in the Lowe's Angels studio in 2015 didn't know any of this yet. He set up the SM-58 on the stand in the booth. He ran the cable to the preamp. He adjusted the levels, trying to compensate for the microphone's limitations. On the console, the waveforms looked different than they would with a condenser mic. Rougher, more immediate. "Okay," David said through the talkback. "We're rolling, take one." Michael closed his eyes and began to sing. The song was "I Believe in You," a ballad he'd written about faith and doubt and the small moments that keep you grounded. His voice came through the speakers with a rawness that stopped David mid-adjustment. It wasn't perfect. The frequency response wasn't as smooth as it would have been with a U87. The high end wasn't as pristine as it would have been with a vintage tube mic, but it was real. Every breath was present. Every word carried weight. Michael wasn't performing the song. He was living inside it. Marcus, the assistant engineer, had been checking his phone. He stopped and looked up at the speakers. That's... He started, then didn't finish the sentence. David understood. He'd recorded thousands of vocals. He knew the difference between technical perfection and emotional truth. This was the latter. When the take finished, David leaned back in his chair. Michael, that was incredible, but I have to ask, why this microphone? I could give you better sound quality, better clarity. Why do you insist on using this specific mic? Michael came into the control room. He picked up the SM-58 and turned it over in his hands. My grandfather gave me this microphone when I was 17, he said quietly. I spent 2 years in his basement learning how to sing. Not just the technique, the purpose. He taught me that every word has to mean something. That if you're just making noise, you're wasting everyone's time, including your own. He paused, running his thumb over the familiar scratches. This microphone heard me when I was nobody, when I was just a kid who loved old songs and didn't know if anyone else would care. It heard me fail 1,000 times before I got it right. It heard me figure out who I was as a singer. David and Marcus listened without interrupting. Every time I hold this microphone, Michael continued, I remember what my grandfather taught me. I remember why I started. I remember that success doesn't mean anything if you lose the connection, if you stop meaning what you sing. He set the microphone gently on the console. I've recorded with expensive equipment, beautiful vintage gear, state-of-the-art technology, and it all sounds great. But when I need to remember why I'm doing this, when I need to cut through all the industry noise and just be honest, I come back to this. David nodded slowly. It's not about the equipment. It's never been about the equipment, Michael said. It's about what the equipment represents. This microphone represents the moment I learned that talent without purpose is just noise. That you can have the best voice in the world, but if you don't have something to say, no one will listen. The room was quiet for a moment. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man, David said. He was, Michael said softly. He passed away in 2010, 5 years ago. I didn't get to sing for him as much as I wanted to in those last years. I was always traveling, always touring, always chasing the next thing. His voice caught slightly. The last time I saw him, he was in the hospital. I brought this microphone with me. The nurses let me set it up in his room. I sang The Way You Look Tonight while he slept. I don't know if he heard me, but I needed to sing to him one more time the way I used to in his basement. Marcus had tears in his eyes. David looked down at the console, throat tight. He left me the microphone in his will, Michael continued, along with a letter. The letter said, this microphone knows who you really are. Don't ever let success make you forget. Michael picked up the SM-58 again. So I don't use other microphones because I think they sound bad. I use this one because it keeps me honest. Every scratch, every dent, every piece of tape holding it together reminds me of where I came from. Reminds me that the voice the world hears is only valuable if it's connected to something real. David understood now. This wasn't about audio fidelity or technical perfection. This was about artistic integrity, about staying connected to the reason you create in the first place. Thank you for telling us that, David said, and for the record, that take we just did. That's the one, don't record it again. That's the version that belongs on the album. Michael smiled. You think so? I know so, David said, because you meant every word and people will feel it. The album was released 4 months later. I Believe in You became one of Michael's most beloved songs. Critics praised its emotional honesty. Fans wrote letters about how the song had helped them through difficult times. Michael never told the public about the microphone. It wasn't a marketing story, it was personal, but in interviews, when people asked about his creative process, he always said the same thing. I try to remember why I started. I try to stay connected to the reason I fell in love with music in the first place, because success can give you everything except that connection. You have to protect it yourself. The SM-58 remained in Michael's possession. It traveled to every recording session. It sat on his home studio console. The tape yellowed further. The scratches deepened. The foam eventually had to be replaced again. But the microphone itself, the capsule, the grill, the body that had been in Demetrio's basement, that had heard thousands of hours of practice, that had captured Michael's voice at its most vulnerable, remained unchanged. Engineers still offered him better options. Studio managers still questioned his choice. Industry professionals still didn't understand why a multi-platinum artist insisted on using equipment that looked like it belonged in a storage unit. Michael didn't explain it every time. He didn't need to. He knew the truth. The microphone wasn't about sound quality. It was about remembering who he was before success. Before fame, before the world knew his name. It was about holding on to the lesson his grandfather had taught him in that Burnaby basement, that talent is a gift, but purpose is a choice, that every performance is either an honest attempt to connect or just noise. The voice the world fell in love with had been shaped by a tool no one thought was good enough, but it had never been about the tool. It had been about the discipline, the honesty, the relentless focus on meaning every word. And that lesson, captured in the scratched metal body of a second-hand Shure SM58, remained the most valuable piece of equipment Michael Bublé ever owned, not because of what it could do, but because of what it helped him remember.